a set of laws. And basically it worked as reverse affirmative action. So, for example, there's 8% white population in South Africa. Businesses get fined if they have a workforce that's over 8% white. So this obviously has negative effects on the economy, because anytime businesses aren't hiring the most qualified person for a position, regardless of skin color, it's going to hurt the business, it's going to hurt the economy. And this has had an even more compounding impact, because there are certain industries with job vacancies in South Africa where there are no qualified black workers to fill the positions. Think engineering. And rather than hire qualified white workers, those positions are being left completely vacant, because if a white worker is hired, the business is going to receive hefty fines from the government. So of course, this is having a very negative impact on South Africa. But you see, black economic empowerment laws were put into place through identity politics. See, they said, okay, well, the white people were bad. Well, now we need to even the playing field, and we need to create laws that give black people the advantage. And again, anytime you have identity politics and create laws to advantage one group of person at the expense of another group of people, you wind up with a situation where everyone involved loses. So these black economic empowerment laws get put into place and the economy hurts. Well, the politicians aren't going to say, we were wrong. No, that's not going to happen. What's going to happen is they double down. So the black economic freedom fighters, who are openly communists, come along and they say what the problem is we're still being oppressed by these evil white people. You've seen this narrative in America. Everything is the oppressed versus the oppressor. So the black economic, the economic freedom fighters, my apologies, come along and they say, no. What the problem is that the white people have all the land. So they say we need to confiscate and redistribute all white-owned farmland. Oh, and by the way, we're not even going to give the farmers compensation for stealing their land. And when you play identity politics, you radicalize people, so the population gets behind this. They say, yes, let's confiscate all white-owned farmland, kick the farmers off their land, and not give them compensation. Now, because the economic freedom fighters are communists, and the very nature of communism is violence, right? I mean, how do you kick people off of their land? You could claim it's legal, although I could talk to you about natural law, why we all have a right to our property, and that can't be taken away. But in order to take someone's land, you need the use of force. Well, communists are never, right? That's government force, usually with communism. The government's going to go in and confiscate land, and if you try to stop them, the government's going to imprison you or kill you. That's what communism is. That's why anyone who advocates for communism, they might not realize it, but they're psychopaths. So the economic freedom fighters, they don't want to wait. So they've been openly calling basically for violence, and they chant at their rallies, shoot, kill the farmer. So the radicalized populations, racially divided through identity politics, because it's a very effective way to gain power, a very effective way to divide people. It's what communists always do, you see. You see, when communists started, Karl Marx, everything was the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. But Karl Marx failed because what happened under capitalism was, there's a widening gap between the rich and the poor, but the problem is that what is poverty, right? If you look at poverty in America, it's not quite like poverty in other places, because a rising tide lifts all boats, so to speak. And we actually had in America, before the socialists and the culture Marxists infiltrated, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, we had the greatest percentage of rise of people rising from the lower class to the middle class in world history. So the theory of communism failed. But don't let that ever stop the communist. So we have the historical data that said the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie failed. So the cultural Marxists, which are running rampant in America, they had to redefine themselves. So Now they infiltrated what is known as the progressive movements. They say they're progressive, and everything is about the oppressed versus the oppressor. And of course, white males are the oppressor, and everything's white versus black, gay versus straight, gender fluid versus gender stationary, men versus women. That's where the feminist movement comes in. So everything you see in America is about identity politics. Well, this is why we have to look at what's happening in South Africa. So the communists come along because they're openly communist there. It's not as taboo to say you're communist in Africa because they don't quite have the historical education we even get with the crappy education that we're handed down, government mandated in America. So they're openly communist and they call for violence, and then you have all this farm violence, right? The radicalized masses, they say, all right, you're right, it's the white farmer's fault. So there has been over one violent farm attack in South Africa a day, well over one a day. And just between 2016 and 2017, 74 people were murdered on farms in South Africa. Now keep in mind, these are rural areas, right? So these farm attacks are well coordinated. It's 5, 6, 7 people getting together and having well drawn out plans to attack these farms in the middle of the night and kill the farmers, kill their wives, kill their children. And we're talking very violent stuff. People's eyes being gouged out, nails being driven through people's bodies, people's testicles being ripped off, people being forced to drink boiled water. So it's filled with hatred and violence. It's everything there shouldn't be in the world, but everything the world is dominated by. So you have this violence, and then you have growing sentiment that yes, everything is the fault of the oppressors, the white farmers. So what we need to happen is we need to confiscate and redistribute without compensation the white-owned farmland. So the African National Congress, which is the majority party in South Africa, have actually also adopted this message. We should confiscate, redistribute the land without compensation. Well, today, or this week, the economic freedom fighters put up for vote in Parliament an amendment to the Constitution that the government should have the authority to confiscate land, which is always the goal of the communists. And this just passed. So there is now going to be an amendment to the Constitution in South Africa giving the government the authority to confiscate land. And now what's going to happen, I don't know the full spectrum of politics in South Africa in terms of if there's any way to fight this now, but the government is going to get the authority. And at the threat of gunpoint, the government is going to go onto this farmland and simply based on skin color, and it doesn't matter, like communism, skin color is just what they're using right now. It used to be, like I said, it used to be the bourgeoisie oppressed the proletariat. We need to take everything they have and give government control of it. And now what's going to happen, or this time it's the white farmers, they're the problem, so we need to give the government the authority to take their land. So now the government is going to go onto these farmlands with guns, and they're going to pull their guns on the farmers and say, this land belongs to the government, and you have nothing. We're not going to compensate you, as if that should even be a discussion. We're not going to compensate you, and you're out on the streets. You're homeless if you die. And if you fight back at all, if these farmers fight back, they will either be imprisoned, or if they fight back too hard, they will be resisting what is called a lawful act by the government, although it's not really lawful because under natural law, people have property rights. But if they fight back, they'll be executed by the government of South Africa. So imprisonment or execution. This is the result of identity politics. This is where it all leads. And this is communism, which historically communism it always leads to mass death. Low estimate, 60 million in the Soviet Union. Low estimate, 48 million people in China. It's a violent ideology because it involves the physical taking of what people have to allegedly redistribute it to other people in the country. Of course, this never happens. What happens is a small group of government-connected elites wind up with all of the power, all of the authority, and the masses starve. So what you're going to see in South Africa over the next 10, 15, 20 years is the capitalism, the farmers that knew how to farm the land to feed the population are going to be displaced. The government's going to take over farming. They're not going to do a good job. The people of South Africa aren't going to be able to eat. People are going to start starving, and the government of South Africa is going to look to the West for aid. Please feed the people of South Africa. This is the land's fault. The land's not fertile. Well, the land's not going to be fertile because the people that knew how to farm are being removed from the land. This is what we saw happen in the Ukraine, and millions of people starved to death. So look for that over the next 10 years. And this is the inevitable result of identity politics. But notice that the mainstream media in the West, the mainstream media in America, they haven't reported on the farm murders. And they are, to this point, I haven't even seen them report on the pending confiscation of white-owned farmland in South Africa. And the reason for this is, as I've explained extensively, all of the power institutions, the mainstream media in America, Hollywood, social media, and academia have all been infiltrated by cultural Marxism. So they're not going to report what's happening because they don't want the people of America to see where identity politics lead, to see where socialism leads, because socialism is the dirty cousin of communism. Because all of these ideologies, these collectivist ideologies, it includes fascism as well. It's just, fascism is another cousin of communism, which is why the fascists, actually, they were communists before they were fascist. If you read the book The Big Lie by Dinesh D'Souza, you would know that. So they don't want you to see where this identity politics leads, because identity politics, socialism, communism, are all designed to increase the power of, ironically, the bourgeoisie, the oligarchy of rule, because you get people mad at other people so you're taking away individual responsibility. Say, oh, what we need to happen is the government needs to come in and take away people's rights. Give the government authority to favor one group over another, and this will create equality. But in reality, it never creates equality. It just creates an even wider power vacuum. For the oligarchy. They gain power because they have government authority, the monopoly over the use of force, versus the masses who are largely left at the whim of the ruling class. So you're not going to see this reported by academia. You're not going to see this reported by the mainstream media in America, because they don't want you to see where this government authority is going. Because the answer is always, if you want there to be true equality, you just want equality of rights under the law, and you want the government to have very little ability to limit individual rights to all people. It doesn't matter their skin color, and that's how you get a good society. That's why Thomas Jefferson fought so hard, and that's why we had a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, because he wouldn't sign off on it. He said, no, every people deserve a Bill of Rights. Now, people who try to discredit Thomas Jefferson will say he had slaves. I'll get into that another day. He was actually an abolitionist who fought against slavery. They'll say he had children with one of his slaves. Again, if you read the history, you can't technically have a consensual relationship, but based on how things were at the time, it was actually the sister of his dead wife, and that's how things were back in that day. But individual liberty, the point, is the answer. And the reason we have a Bill of Rights, which is freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, the right to peacefully assemble, the right for the media to report what they want without the government imprisoning or killing them, is largely because of people like Thomas Jefferson. And that's always been the answer. Now, America didn't implement it correct at the start, right? They only gave that Bill of Rights to certain people. It shouldn't have been a Bill of Rights for white people. It should have just been the Bill of Rights for all people. Because if that Bill of Rights was for all people, then slavery couldn't have taken place, because slavery was a government program. So the answer is always individual liberty. But of course, what you see happening now in America is, right, you see the safe space culture. They want certain speech mandated by law, certain speech deemed hate speech, right? Why do you see the transgender movement and the government trying to mandate you have to say he, you have to say she, and if you don't, that's a hate crime and they could arrest you. Because the people that want to rule us, the oligarchs, want to set the precedent that you could deem something hate speech, and if you do, you can mandate speech, because that gives the government the authority to limit freedom of speech, and then of course the government will always be the ones who decide what hate speech is. And then once you control speech, you control people's thought, and you basically neuter people's ability to fight back against tyrannical government. That's why you see these pushes for the transgender movement, which has come from the top. That's why this type of thing happens. And now, of course, you're seeing the mass propaganda in America. Oh, you're not safe. Statistically speaking, gun violence has been down in America. Statistically, if you're not in a gang in an inner city, if you just don't join a gang, you're statistically, you're pretty much not going to get shot and murdered that way with a gun. Mass shootings, which the media tries to act like is an epidemic, it's actually at a 50-year low, and although it is sad and although it is scary, you're talking about 50 people being killed a year, 70 people being killed a year, 112 people being killed, 90 people being killed, and that's a year. So it's like getting struck by lightning. It's just terrifying. And the answer to that is, and yes, it wouldn't be perfect, but all you have to do is increase individual liberty, allow law-abiding citizens to carry guns, and you'll pretty much be safe from mass shootings. It won't be perfect. There'll still be people that go off the rail and kill other people, but overall it'll be safer, and we would keep our individual liberty, which we have to fight back against tyrannical government. But we're not going to see the land confiscation, just like we haven't seen the murder of the farmers reported on by the mainstream media, because it's the agenda they're pushing. It's the growth of government power. Because once the government gets the power to confiscate land, they pretty much have full tyrannical power. How could you fight them, right? If you say anything against them, they'll take everything you have. You're broke, you're out in the streets, you're in prison, you're murdered. And that's where this is all going. That's why we have to hold on to our gun rights. And this is why we have to heed a warning from South Africa. We need to remove race from politics. Just like we once separated church from state, we need to separate race from state. We need to separate gender from state. We need to get to a point where all people are just equal under the law, the same exact laws. Stop looking for the government to create equality, because the government only creates inequality. And as long as we give the government the ability to choose winners and losers, then you'll have special interest groups being pushed from the top, attempting to get resources, attempting to get extra rights for their individual group rather than for all people. Individual liberty, a Bill of Rights, has always been the answer. If you want a great society, stop having the government create a great society and just demand equality under the law, a voluntary society of all people. Please look at what's going on in South Africa, because if we don't learn from them, soon it will be happening in the United States of America. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to support me on Patreon, www.patreon.com/FFRnews. I'm Tom Anderson. Share this link.